The Sonora Desert does not ease you into the morning. It simply shifts from one shade of dark to another, and then without ceremony, the sky at the eastern edge goes gray, then copper, then a pale, hard gold that falls across the red Arizona earth like something being poured rather than risen. The saguaro cactus hold their arms up in the early light the way they always do, unchanged, unbothered, as if the night had asked nothing of them and the day would ask nothing either. At the Lark Ranch, the day began before the light did, 6 o'clock, the east fence line, a woman in a flannel shirt with a hammer in her hand and her dark hair pulled back from her neck, crouching at a section of broken post in the thin, cool air that the Sonora morning still held before the sun burned it away. The sound of the hammer carried clearly. One strike. A pause, another strike, even and unhurried. Not the sound of urgency, the sound of a person doing what needs doing at the pace it requires, without complaint. The fence had broken in March, a section of old timber, dry-rotted from inside, weakened by years of Sonora sun and cold nights and the slow, particular cruelty of time on wood that nobody replaced soon enough. It went down without a storm, without warning, the way things go when the damage has been happening quietly for longer than anyone noticed. Elsa Drum found it at dawn. She looked at the gap in the fence line, looked at the desert beyond it, looked at the cattle that needed to stay on the right side of it. Then she went to the supply shed, got the hammer and nails and what spare timber was left, and fixed it before the sun climbed high enough to make the work twice as hard. She did not call anyone. She did not leave a note for a problem to be solved later. She fixed it and went inside and made coffee. The fence broke again 12 days later, a different section, further north, where the wood was worse. Then again. Each time, Elsa Drum fixed it, alone, before 8 in the morning. The rhythm of the hammer became part of the Sonora dawn, the way the cactus wren became part of it. Expected, reliable, belonging. Rhett Calloway first saw her from the ridge to the west. He was moving cattle along the trail beside the Lark property, a seasonal route he had known for 3 years, terrain as familiar to him as his own hands. But the woman fixing fence in the morning mist was not someone he had seen here before. He stopped his horse on the ridge and watched. She did not look up. She kept her rhythm, our shoulders set under the flannel, working with the efficiency of someone not performing effort, but simply expending it, as if the hammer were an extension of her arm, and the broken post were a problem with a known solution, and there was nothing more or less to it than that. He watched for a few minutes, then pressed his horse on. But the next morning, on the same trail, she was there again, and the morning after that. On the 7th morning, he stopped. "You need an extra set of hands?" She looked up for the first time, looked up at the man on horseback with the directness of someone who had not been startled because she had heard him coming and simply chosen to finish the nail she was driving first. "No," she said. He did not ride on immediately. He sat on his horse for a few seconds longer, looking at the fence section, looking at the wood, not pity, not curiosity, the look of someone actually thinking about what he was seeing. Then he touched the brim of his hat and moved on. The next morning he was back. But before we follow her further into those desert mornings, tell me something. Have you ever done something alone for so long that it stopped feeling heavy and just became your way of living? And right now, Where are you listening to this story from? Is it a place that feels steady, or a place that still asks something from you every day? There are things about Elsa Drum that you understand before she tells you anything. Her hands, first, wide palms, short nails, calluses at the base of each finger, and a thin scar along the left thumb from a wire fence incident 3 seasons back. The hands of someone who has been doing real work for long enough that the work has written itself into the skin. Her shoulders were broader than most women she knew, built by years of hauling feed sacks and moving irrigation pipe and lifting things that needed lifting without waiting for someone else to come along. Her body was full and solid, the body of a person who actually works a ranch rather than manages one from a distance. Strength without display, mass without apology. She wore her dark hair practical, boots with dried mud on them before 7 in the morning, eyes the color of dark earth, direct and slightly narrowed from years of squinting into Sonora sun. She was 29 years old and had been running the Lark Ranch alone for 11 months. Her father, Elsa Drum, had worked that land for 31 years, raised cattle, maintained the pasture, kept the east fence line repaired with a stubbornness that the Arizona desert seemed to personally challenge each season. He died of a cardiac event in April of the previous year, quickly, without warning, on a Tuesday morning when he had plans for the afternoon. Elsa had driven back from Tucson the same day she got the call. She had a younger brother, Marcus, with a good job and a young family, and a life that was his own. She could have called him. He would have come. But the Lark Ranch was what her father had left to her specifically, not because Marcus was less loved, but because Elsa Drum had known which of his children would stay, and he had been right, and Elsa had always understood that. So she did not call. She sorted the paperwork. She introduced herself to the men her father had trusted for seasonal work, and told them what would change and what wouldn't. She walked every fence line on the property over the course of 3 days to know exactly what she had inherited. And then she got up the next morning and ran the ranch. There was no dramatic resolve in this, no moment of deciding to be strong. It was simply, this is what needs doing, and I am the one here to do it, and so I will. What she did not do was wait to be helped, not because she was too proud to accept help, or because she believed herself capable of everything alone. She didn't ask for help because asking had never been the language she spoke. In 31 years on a working ranch, she had watched her father do everything that needed doing and ask for assistance only when a task physically required more than 2 hands. That was the model she had absorbed. That was how a person ran a place. What she had not fully examined, and what 11 months of solitude had not yet forced her to look at clearly, was the difference between not needing help and not knowing how to receive it. She fixed the fence each morning. She did not think about the fact that she was doing it alone. She simply thought about what the fence needed. That is what it looks like when a person has been their own support system for long enough that the support has become invisible. Not a burden they carry, just the shape of the ground beneath their feet. Rhett Calloway moved cattle for a living, and had for 8 years, and knew the terrain of the Sonora Desert the way some people know a house they grew up in, not by looking, but by feel. Which arroyos flooded first in summer monsoon, which trails went soft after rain, where the water sources held longest in dry years, He carried this knowledge the way working people carry their expertise, lightly, without announcing it, in the form of good decisions made quickly. He was 33, tall and broadly built in the lean way of outdoor labor, muscle earned through function, not form. Dark hair under a worn hat, his skin the deep bronze of the Sonora sun, not a tan cultivated, but a color accumulated through years of being where the work was. His eyes were an unusual green for this part of the desert, clear and unhurried, the eyes of someone who looked at things long enough to actually see them. He had grown up in New Mexico on a smaller ranch than the Lark, and left at 22 without a specific plan and with a general understanding that staying in one place felt, to him, like a door closing. He was not running from anything particular. He was simply more comfortable with motion than stillness, more at ease moving toward something unnamed than settling into something known. 8 years of seasonal cattle work had confirmed what he already suspected about himself. He was good at it, good at reading land and animal and weather, good at the particular self-sufficiency that comes from spending long stretches with only your own judgment for company, and good at leaving, which was, in its way, a skill. Knowing when a season was over, packing without sentiment, not letting any one place accumulate enough weight to hold him. He told himself this was freedom, and for years it was close enough to true that the difference did not matter. What he had not let himself examine too closely was the particular quality of the mornings, the way the first hour of the day, alone in the desert, with the cattle settling and the light coming in from the east, had started to feel not peaceful, but simply empty in a way that peace does not feel. He was used to solitude, but there is a difference between solitude and the slow, accumulated awareness that no one is waiting for you anywhere, and that you have arranged your life specifically so that this is the case. He had pulled that arrangement tight around himself like protection for so long that he had almost stopped noticing the shape of what it cost. And then, 7 mornings in a row, he watched a woman fix a fence alone in the Sonora dawn. There are people who move through the world, and there are people who hold something in place. He had spent 8 years being the first kind, and something about watching Elsa Drum be so completely, uncomplicatedly, the second kind made him stop his horse on the ridge and stay there longer than he needed to. Some people keep moving because they have never found a place that weighs more than the road. The road is familiar. The road asks nothing but forward. But forward, gone far enough, eventually just becomes a way. On the 8th morning, he came back with timber. Good wood, not the soft pine that rotted in the Sonora humidity, but treated cedar from a supplier he knew 40 minutes east of town. He stacked it beside the section she was working on without asking permission, pulled his own tools from the saddlebag, and looked at the fence post she was about to nail. "Gotta replace from the base," he said. "The rot goes down 8 inches. You can nail the top all season, and it'll keep falling." She did not argue. She looked at the post, looked at him, and handed him the crowbar. They worked without much conversation, and the quiet between them was the specific quiet of 2 people who are both actually focused on the same task, rather than performing work while waiting for the other person to speak. He pulled the bad posts. She set the new ones. He drilled where the wood was dense. She held what needed holding. No instruction, no explanation, no negotiation, just the natural division of labor that emerges when 2 capable people are paying attention. 2 hours, a section of fence that would last the season. He had asked for lunch and coffee as payment, and she had agreed, and she cooked without ceremony. Beans and eggs and toast. Food that was fuel. Food that said, "I'm feeding you because you did real work, and not because I need you to feel welcomed." He ate everything on the plate without flattering the meal, and she noticed that, and did not say anything about it. The days that followed shaped themselves into a rhythm that no one designed. Mornings, they divided the property. He took the south and west fence lines. She took north and east. They met back at the shed to compare what needed attention and organize the next day's work. It was efficient. It was also, quietly, the first time in 11 months that Elsa Drum did not have to hold the complete map of everything in her head alone. Midday, lunch at the kitchen table. The meals stayed simple because simplicity was what fit their working day. They talked about the land, which sections of pasture were looking thin, where the irrigation channel needed clearing, what the cattle were doing in the heat. This was not small talk. This was the actual content of the day, discussed between two people who both understood it. Afternoons, the longer repairs, the tasks that needed more than one person, replacing a full gate hinge, restringing a long section of wire, clearing the debris that had blocked the north water channel. These took time and physical effort and the particular coordination of people who have learned, without words, how the other one works. Evenings, the back step of the main house. 2 chairs. The Sonora sunset, doing what Sonora sunsets do, turning the sky into something that made a person understand why people built lives in deserts, why the harshness and the beauty were inseparable, why you could not have one without accepting the other. They talked more in the evenings, not because the day was over, but because the physical labor had settled something in both of them, the way hard work does, clearing out whatever noise was running underneath, so that what remained was just what was actually there. "You count the cattle every morning?" he asked one evening. "Every morning. My father did it every morning." "You check the numbers against the previous day?" "In a ledger. Same ledger he used." A pause. "Same handwriting section in the front that I can't bring myself to move past." He didn't respond to that with anything except a slow nod that acknowledged it without trying to fix it. She appreciated that more than she would have been able to explain. The silences were increasingly easy. Not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who are comfortable enough in the same space that filling it is not a requirement. She noticed him noticing things. The way a section of pasture was browning earlier than usual, the way one of the older cows was moving slightly off, the way the late afternoon wind had shifted direction 3 days running, which meant rain was coming. He saw things she also saw, and named them in the same plain language she used. And the experience of being seen accurately by someone who was also being useful was, it turned out, something she had not realized she was missing until it was present. One afternoon she caught herself listening for the sound of his horse before she saw him coming. She noted this and did not analyze it further. The fence that had broken 8 times in 11 months did not break while he was there. Neither of them mentioned this. The conversation happened on a Thursday, in the kind of late afternoon when the light in the Sonora Desert turns everything it touches the color of old copper, the mountains at the eastern horizon gone violet, the sky between them and the last of the sun a band of deep amber, the saguaro casting shadows long enough to reach the far side of the yard. They were sitting on the back step with water, not coffee. Too late for coffee, too early for the dark. "You said you had someone standing beside you," he said. "Before." She had said this once, briefly, several days earlier. She had not expected him to return to it. "Yes," she said. "What happened?" She was quiet for a moment, not reluctant, assembling. "He left before my father got sick. We had been together 3 years. I had assumed, I don't know, that people who say they're staying, stay." She looked at the mountains. "He left in January. My father died in April, and when April came I kept turning to say something to both of them, and there was no one there." Rhett did not offer sympathy. He asked, "Did you see it coming?" "Looking back, yes. At the time, no." A pause. "I was too busy believing what I wanted to be true." He turned his water glass slowly in his hands. "I've done the opposite of that." She looked at him. "I left before anyone could leave me," he said, "for 8 years. I'd be somewhere long enough to know it well, and then I'd feel the edges of it starting to close in, and I'd move before it became something I owed to someone." He paused. "I told myself it was honest, not making promises I couldn't keep." Was it? "I don't know any more." He said it plainly, without performance. "I think it was honest in the beginning, and then it became a habit I kept calling honesty because I didn't want to examine it more carefully." She thought about this. "You didn't want to owe anyone. I didn't want to disappoint anyone." A small, honest correction. Which is a different thing. Owing is about them. Disappointing is about me. Elsa Drum looked at Rhett Calloway in the copper light of the Sonora evening and understood something that she had not been looking for, that this man had organized his entire life around a fear she recognized, arrived at from the opposite direction. She had held everything so tightly alone that she had forgotten to let anyone in. He had let no one close enough that letting go was the only direction left. 2 different ways of protecting the same thing. To be understood without having to explain the whole history first is rare enough that most people only experience it a few times in a life. It does not feel like a gift when it arrives. It feels like something simply clicking into place, the way a well-made piece of wood meets its joint, firm and right, and as if it could not have fit any other way. He had no fixed address. She had never left. These 2 facts sat between them without being spoken for several days, present the way the Rincon Mountains were present on the eastern horizon, always there, not demanding acknowledgement, but impossible to pretend you hadn't noticed. The cattle season did not run year-round on this trail. He had taken himself off the rotation for the current month, staying in a room at a boarding house in the nearest town. He had told himself it was because the Lark Ranch needed the extra labor. This was true. It was not the whole truth, and he knew it. And he did not examine the gap between them too closely, because the gap was where the uncomfortable question lived. Elsa knew the arithmetic of it without asking. Whatever this was, it had a natural end point, unless someone chose otherwise. She was not someone who waited for circumstances to resolve things she could see coming, but she was also not someone who named things before they were ready to be named, and this did not yet feel ready. Instead, it lived in the spaces between tasks, in the way he handed her things before she reached for them, not anticipating exactly, but present enough that there was rarely a moment of needing to ask. in the way she started leaving the coffee on a second time in the late morning because he was usually back from the South Line by 10, and she had noticed he drank it the same way she did, black, in whatever mug was closest. Small adjustments, the kind that happen without decision, which is how you know they are real. One afternoon she went to start a repair on the gatepost and found it already done. The new hardware set and tested, and the old hardware cleaned and stacked on the fence rail for her to decide what to do with. He had done it before she got there and had not mentioned it. This was not performance. It was just the task was done, and he was the one there to do it. That evening she said, "You're good at this." "At what?" "Seeing what needs doing without being asked." He looked at the middle distance. "I've spent a long time doing things I chose to do without anyone holding me to them. Makes you either good at noticing or good at disappearing, depending on the day." "Which one are you now?" The question settled into the air between them and stayed there. He did not answer immediately. She did not rush him, and the not answering was itself a kind of answer, because a man who had spent 8 years good at disappearing would have had a ready deflection. The fact that he sat with the question and let it sit meant something. Not everyone who wants to stay knows how. Wanting and knowing are different skills, acquired by different means, and some people arrive at 33 having practiced only one of them. The want was not the question. The question was whether the knowing could be learned here, in a place that had already asked more of one person than most places ask. She noticed it first on a Monday. He was working faster, not urgently, not careless, but with the efficiency of someone managing his time rather than simply being in it. He finished the south pasture check before 9 instead of his usual 10. He ate lunch quickly. He did not sit on the back step that evening. She did not ask. On Tuesday, the same. He was present and useful and slightly elsewhere, the way a person is when one part of them is already calculating what comes next. She had seen this in people before. She recognized the shape of it. Wednesday morning, he came to the shed while she was loading the truck. "I got a message from the outfit in Cochise County," he said. "They need someone for the fall drive. Starts in 3 weeks. She kept loading the truck. That was always a possibility. It was. He leaned against the truck bed. "I told them I'd let them know by Friday." She nodded, did not look up. "Elsa." "What?" "I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not telling you because I've decided. I'm telling you because I don't think I should decide without telling you." She put the last bag of feed into the truck and turned around and looked at him directly. "What is there to tell?" "Not cold. Genuine." "That you matter in this," he said. "To what I decide. You're not a circumstance I'm working around." The morning air was still. A roadrunner crossed the far end of the yard without acknowledging them. The smell of the desert before the heat came in. Dry earth, something blooming somewhere in the scrub, the particular clean quality of Sonora mornings that made it difficult to think dishonestly. She held his eyes and said nothing for a moment. "I've been thinking," he said, "that I've never let a place cost me anything. Never let a choice to stay mean I was giving something up. Because then the staying would mean something. And if I left after that—" He stopped. "It would be a real leaving," she said. "Yes." She understood this exactly. She had felt it from the other side, the person who stayed while someone else was already halfway gone and didn't know until the leaving was complete. Loss does not arrive when a person walks out the door. It arrives the moment they begin preparing to. You can feel it in the change of rhythm, in the slightly shorter sentences, in the way someone stops committing weight to the present because they are already redistributing it toward the future. She had felt this starting, and she had not said anything, because she was not sure she had the right to. He had made no promises, neither had she, but the knowing of it sat heavily in the chest, in the way of things that are real. He found her at the back step after dinner, already there, already looking at the Sonora night. The sky above the desert was doing its full work, stars so numerous and so low that the darkness between them seemed less like absence and more like a different kind of presence. The mountains to the east were shapes cut from deeper black. Somewhere in the scrub, a coyote ran something. The air had the cool, dry edge of late summer nights at desert elevation, not cold enough to require a jacket, cold enough to remind you that the desert's warmth was a daytime thing, borrowed and returned. He sat down beside her, not across from her, beside, close enough that his shoulder was near hers in the dark. She did not move away. "I'm not going to take the cochise job," he said. She waited. "I want to tell you why." "Not so you'll think a certain thing about it, just because I think you should have the real reason." "Okay," she said, "because for the first time in 8 years I woke up this morning and didn't want to be anywhere other than where I was." He said it plainly, looking at the stars rather than at her. "That's never happened before, and I think if I leave that, if I trade it for the next trail and the next season and the next good reason to keep moving, I'll spend the rest of my life making that trade, and I'll know what I gave up every morning." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not staying because the ranch needs labor," she said. Not a question, making sure. "No? And you're not staying because you feel responsible for me?" "No. You've made it extremely clear you don't need that." A breath of something like a laugh. Brief, real. "Then why?" He turned and looked at her directly. "Because you're the first person I've wanted to stay near, more than I've wanted to know what's around the next bend. And I've been going around bends for 8 years. I know what's there. There's another bend." The desert held them in its silence, the enormous, indifferent, completely steady silence of a landscape that has been exactly itself for 10,000 years, and will be exactly itself for 10,000 more, and finds no reason to be otherwise. Elsa Drum sat with everything he had just said and did not perform a reaction to it, did not deflect, did not thank him in a way that moved the moment into something smaller. She stood up. He watched. She took one step toward him, one small, deliberate step, and then she extended her hand, not in greeting, but in the way you offer something you mean to keep offering. He took it. Her palm was rough and warm and fit against his the way two things fit that were made for actual use. Not decorative, not delicate. Real. They stood like that for a moment in the dark, and the desert ran on in all directions, and nothing was promised beyond the night they were standing in, and that was sufficient. More than sufficient. Staying is not a statement. It is not a ceremony. It is the choice you make when you wake up the next morning and make it again. The Sonora monsoon arrived in July, as it always does, not gently. Monsoon rain in the Arizona desert falls like an argument, sudden, emphatic, done on its own schedule. It turns the hard red earth dark in minutes and raises the smell of petrichor so strong it stops you mid-step, the smell of soil that has been dry too long finally drinking. It runs off the saguaro in clean sheets and fills the arroyos with fast brown water and causes every living thing in the desert to do something urgent with the moisture while it lasts. The Lark Ranch fence lines held. Elsa and Rhett stood on the covered porch and watched the rain come in across the desert from the southwest. The wall of weather visible for 20 minutes before it arrived, the curtain of it sweeping over the scrub, and the cactus and the distant ridgeline, and finally reaching the ranch yard, drumming on the tin roof in a rhythm that the desert imposed on everything equally. "First monsoon I've watched from one place," he said. She looked at him. "Last few years I'd always be between places when the rains came, watching from a truck or from a camp that wasn't mine." He watched the rain turn the yard to shallow rivers. "This is better. It floods the south corner every year," she said. "We'll need to regrade that section before it dries out." "I know. I looked at the drainage last week." He paused. "I have an idea about it if you want to hear it." "Tell me tomorrow, when I can see the ground." "Tomorrow," he agreed. It was the kind of conversation that only exists between people who are inside the same future, not planning around each other, planning together, which requires a level of trust so basic and so solid that it has stopped feeling like trust and started feeling like ground. The Lark Ranch was not easier now than it had been 11 months ago. The land was the same land, demanding, dry between rains, unforgiving of deferred maintenance, insisting on attention with the consistency of something that has no patience for neglect. The cattle were the same cattle. The fence posts, replaced now with good cedar, would eventually need replacing again. The work did not diminish, but the mornings were different. The sound of the hammer that had echoed alone across the Sonora dawn, single and steady, and belonging entirely to one person, was two people now, not always in the same place, not always on the same task, but audible to each other, the understanding that when the morning began, someone else was also beginning it, somewhere on the same land, toward the same purpose. She had stopped doing the full mental accounting of everything that needed doing every night before sleep. Not because she trusted it less, because she did not have to carry the whole map alone anymore. He had stopped calculating when the next move would be, not because he had stopped thinking ahead, because thinking ahead no longer felt like escape planning. There was a difference between a life you endure by yourself and a life you inhabit with someone. Elsa had been enduring. She had been doing it with more capability and dignity than most people manage alone. But endurance was still the shape of it. Holding against, not moving with. Rhett had been moving with such consistency that he had lost the ability to feel the ground beneath him. The rain came down. The desert drank. On the back porch, shoulder to shoulder, they watched the Sonora monsoon do what it had always done, not gentle, not predictable, but necessary. Some things are better together, not because they cannot exist alone, but because alone was never the point. Out here in the desert, the wind takes many things away, but sometimes it leaves something behind. Not something perfect, not something planned, but something that stayed when it didn't have to. Before we leave them there tonight, I want to ask you something. Do you believe someone like him, a man who spent years never staying, can truly learn to stay when it matters? Or are some people only meant to walk beside you for a while before the road takes them somewhere else? And as you're listening to this, where are you right now? What were you doing when this story reached you? Does it feel like a place you've been carrying on your own, or a place where someone finally stood beside you? Tell me what you think. I read every comment under these stories,